think we're going to go back to Southern California, which we have to say was hugely influential across the book. Not to say that there was any other geography that wasn't as important, but Southern California had a tremendous amount of contributions to the book. They have a ton of independent labels. It was kind of where the screamo, more kind of noisy hardcore started.
Which is kind of my thing. Just look at me.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm a screamo guy.
I mean, you had Touchstone labels like Gravity Records and 31G and GSL, which actually started in Colorado but didn't really start putting out records that were in here until they were in Southern California. You had bands that I mean, if you read the essay that accompanies that particular chapter, it's by a guy named Justin Pearson, who's in that band, The Locust, who also runs 31G Records. I mean, he's talking about just they had no money. There's a record, not this one, but I think it's on either the next slide or the one after that. We'll get to it in a second. That he indentured himself for 6 months at a Kinko's to pay off the bill that he couldn't pay for all the photocopying and reproduction he did. It was for the Black Dice book. Right. So a band called Black Dice wanted to do a record. They're all artists. They wanted to do something special. They weren't sure they wanted him to really put out the record. So they said, okay, well, if you're putting out our record, I want colored vinyl and I want a 64-page full-color art book of all of our collages. So he said, well, that's what it takes, then I'm going to do it. So,
But this record is a puzzle. Like, each one of those records dovetails into the next one. And this was his band for another label called GSL.
Right. So this is a good example when we talk about criteria, because this isn't made one at a time by any stretch of the imagination.
No.
That's offset print, that's professionally boxed and packaged. I think it was made at probably Rainbow. Erica. But making jigsaw vinyl and the amount of testing that went into cutting plates that could do that and making sure it fit was extraordinary. And, things have changed even from this came out. This came out in about 2001. Mm-hmm. And, that record now would be $40. I mean, the soft pack box set 7-inch up there is like $34 or something like that. And I think that's totally fair. This was $8.
Well, it's like Jack White has that new record out that he calls a triple decker. That's a record, but you have to take a box cutter to split it open to get a third record from between the two parts of the record.
Right.
So it's ridiculous what people are doing now.
But in 2001, this was $8. And I remember people freaking out and being angry. I remember being at record stores in New York. One of the guys who co-edited this book with me worked at a record store called Sound and Fury, which is in the Lower East Side of New York before.
Great record store.
Amazing. Before it was cool to be on the Lower East Side. And
before it was cool to collect records.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I remember people coming into the store and being like, $8 for 4 7-inch. Are you crazy? And you think about that now. So there was no return on this. So it's like Justin's essays about why I did this for no return. Okay, we can go to the next one. Does anyone have that record here?
I do.
Here's a newer label. It's a good example. They're called Not Fun Records. They're in LA. They do a series every year called Wallboard Fortress, where they get kind of bands to do a limited edition 7. It's like 300 copies or so per. They do a subscription series. It's really the only way you can get it. But in this particular volume in that series, they screen printed every cover, and then they gold foiled it. And they're doing these literally one at a time, and it's a whole series, and it goes over a full year. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of hours of work, which I know you've done on records too. And
we did the last couple of days for the Manor Astroman record that we have for sale.
Why don't we talk about that for a second?
Yeah.
And tell us about how that brought you back to the days where you assembled records.
Oh, shut up, dude. Well, the Manor Astroman record that we're selling today with the book, we wanted to do something that was a tribute to the book, and so everything about it is personal. It's like the bags are, like AntiStatic Bags. The Star Crunch from Manor Astroman individually cut the circuit board, real circuit boards in the record, behind the record, and we rubber stamp the records themselves, and then it's all sealed with a sticker. And we came up with that in a month.
Yeah.
So, it was not so much about economy as much as, like, what can we do that is totally messed up that people will really enjoy seeing? And it's exciting. It's really palpably exciting. So.
Was there ever a record you worked on where halfway through the labor of making that record you were like, oh man, F this?
Everyone.
I had a hunch you were going to say that.
Everyone, like that Olivia Tremor Control one. Probably 2 copies in, and we did 600. We were like, what the hell were we thinking? And so it just turned into just like a sweatshop.
Right.
So
there are a lot of stories like that in the book. So also in the book, each record that made the cut, we researched who put it out, what year, who was the label, pressing information, what were the mechanics and modes of, the processes that they used to make the record. Was it screen printed? Was it die cut? What was offset? What sort of paper stock did you use? And in doing this research and talking to like 300 different people, the repetition of I don't know what we were thinking. I couldn't sleep in my house because every square foot of my house was covered with
things that were
chipboard drying from screen printing. There was so much toxic fumes from all the glue that I had to fumigate my house. Blah blah blah. We lost the screens 3 times. We had to redo them. So that happened again and again. And I feel like it's a very unique undertaking because everyone involved cares so much.
But ultimately, it's thankless until a book like this comes out, which kind of galvanizes what in a lot of ways is like a vanity thing. So.
That's another good point, which is a lot of the feedback we got while we were doing the research were people saying, when I put this out and I sent out the mail orders, like let's say, I'm making this up, but let's say like Carolina, which is a band we'll show you in a second, had 25 pre-orders sent by cash that they had to send out, and they would send out the records, and they get a letter, 6 weeks later from whoever they sent it to saying, you sent me a damaged record, there's oil all over it, or it's smudged and burned, can you please send me a new one? And it's almost like sometimes your audience doesn't even notice what you're trying to do, whereas for their records, they're made one at a time. They purposely kind of destroyed them or made them collage or whatnot. And I think that's interesting too, because when you go through used bins, you often see records that look destroyed, especially in this type of music, and they're not necessarily meant to be destroyed. Mm-hmm. They're not actually destroyed. They were meant to look that way.
Well, they were meant to be ephemeral. Right. It's like of the moment.
Right. So. And that's actually a fairly interesting point too, because then you have the other side of the spectrum, which is like everything being so pristine and so perfect, and a little dinged corner, devalues a record. But then another interesting point to that, at least to us, is that there are collectors, kind of like you and a lot of your friends, who it kind of goes both ways. There are some records you might want in perfect condition because they're supposed to be, and there are some records where that kind of variance is totally acceptable.
Oh yeah.
So
it's all meant to be enjoyed. It's like whatever you want to do. That's my take on it. Whatever gets you through the day. So it's all about the music. To me, it's always about the music.
And did you feel like a community existed where, like, let's say you'd be digging through, some crates or, looking for records, you like this band and, you see a record and, like, maybe it doesn't appear like what you think it should.
Right.
Did, like, hey, I can email somebody, or hey, there's, a group I can talk to. Mm-hmm. How did you find out, like, what the intent was on that record? Or did you not?
I didn't. I would just wing it. Yeah.
And then maybe if the band came to town, you'd ask them about it.
Right. I said we'd look at the next sample.
Yeah, let's get involved in that. Oh, so here's a great one for the modern eBay age. This is by our co-editor, Brian Roettinger, who runs a design company and record label in LA called Handheld Heart. This record is...
He also designed the new No Age record, which looks awesome.
He did.
So.
And the book.
And the book.
And Soundscreen's Identity. But anyway, just throwing that out there. This came out in about 2003. eBay was like poppin' major at that time. And he only did 300 of these. It was a double 7-inch, one 7-inch, one side of one 7-inch by a band called Orchid, one side of one 7-inch by a band called The Red Scare. He did not want people eBaying this because there was such a limited amount. I mean, these bands were selling a lot more records than that. I mean, Orchid was selling like 10,000 records at the time on a hardcore label, which is crazy. So what he did was he made it a double. He made one side blank on both records. He only took direct orders, and then he hand-etched the person's name and or something identifiable into each record. So if it ever went up on eBay, he would know who was selling it, which was really interesting. And no one had ever done that before. And so when we were out in LA talking about it, we asked him if people eBayed it and if he caught them. And he said 3 people did.
Yeah, but it's like, ultimately, who gives a shit? It's like, what are you going to do? Take away their birthday? They bought it. They can do whatever the hell they want to.
That's totally true. It was more meant to be an experiment. This is another Northern California example. So that band had no money. It's an Eraserata side project called California Lightning. They photocopied black and white paper and a couple different, not black and white image on different color papers. Like Kinko's folded it, used colored artist tape and window screen meshing because they had an excess of in the apartment that they had moved into. They found it in the closet.
Wow.
They turned it into the packaging. So that's similar to the Die Slaughterhouse record. We can go to the next one. Thanks. This is a good one. From
yeah, no, this is another one. I mean, it's a mess. And you think, oh, that's the way the record looks. No, every element you see other than the word in the top left-hand corner and the text along with it, every last bit of that was hand-assembled. Every part of that was glued onto there. So, what the heck were they thinking? Yeah.
And yeah, I think the edition size on that was 1,000. So that was a lot of time.
Not on my watch.
All right, next one, please. Another Northern California example, and like I don't know if you guys are noticing, and you can say you're not, but Northern California was pretty collagey and messy and dirty aesthetically. There was a lot of just mess thrown on things to make it look unique, not necessarily the cleanest or finest design, but something to be said for it. This band Mohinder Nitwits, every single one was different. That's all watercolored. They watercolored and then dipped in like a hardening solvent the paper that ended up being on each one.
Is the Cop Shoot Cop one next?
Cop Shoot Cop's very soon.
Okay, because keep this in mind when you see, because as artsy and craftsy as this one is, the Cop Shoot Cop one is much more savage. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So here are other examples. We'll move through quick. Jessamine was a band that had a ton of work in the book. They always did something exceptional. This was a record on Sub Pop where it came encased in the top left box. There were 4 panels, the same size as the box for inserts.
Yeah, the ones on the right all were stacked, and then it was all bolted together. Like literally there was a bolt that went through the center hole of the record, and everything screwed together.
And both sides were full color screen printed and aligned perfectly.
Ridiculous.
So that was clearly like a finer, more. These guys knew what they were doing. They knew how to screen print very well.
And this is only one example. They did exceptional work with everything.
They have a record called Houdini, which you could actually still get
for $7, $7 or $8, and I buy it like 10 at a time because it's actually locked. Like it comes with a lock, and you have to figure out it's Houdini because you have to figure out how to open it without destroying it. And the key is on the inside, and you have to jimmy it open. It's in the book. It's one of the best designed pieces I've ever seen. So
we can keep going. That's another example, similarly to the
Menor Astroman
that you talked about later.
Yeah, that's sealed. It's glued sealed. So it's kind of like that Servotron record. You have to physically destroy it to get to the record. That's Bruce Gilbert from Wire, by the way. So.
And this was on Sub Pop, as was the Jessamine, and Sub Pop did a ton of great records.